What would you do if you found out your sister had made your child kneel for an hour and cruelly taken away your daughter's stuffed animal? I went through that situation. That stuffed animal was the last memento my late wife gave to my daughter before she passed away. Watching my 8-year-old daughter kneel and cry, begging to keep her deceased mother's memento, filled my heart with rage. But why did my sister do that? And what side would my parents take in this story? Let's follow this story together. Before delving into the details of this story, I would like to extend a sincere thank you for taking the time to listen to my story today. Hello everyone, I'm Owen, a 40-year-old living in San Jose, California. I'm a tech engineer currently working at one of the big companies in Silicon Valley. My current life revolves around my role as a single father, caring for my 11-year-old daughter, Amelia. Amelia is everything to me. I used to have a happy family too, but everything fell apart after 4 years of marriage. My wife, Teresa, and I divorced in 2017, when Amelia was only 3 years old. At that time, I didn't fight for custody because I thought Amelia needed to be with her mother. I wanted Amelia to have the most peaceful and happy childhood possible. Every week, I visited my daughter at least 3 times, took her out to play, had dinner together, and made an effort to maintain the best possible father-daughter relationship. But then life has twists that no one can predict. In 2019, Teresa was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. Teresa passed away on a cold autumn afternoon, leaving Amelia in my arms with the confused eyes of a 5-year-old child. From that day on, I became a single father. My love for Amelia grew even deeper because I understood that she had lost her mother's love. That's a void that no one can fill. Every night when I watch her sleep, I silently promise to love and protect her twice as much to make up for the love that Teresa can no longer give her. Luckily, Amelia and I aren't alone in this journey. My parents, Raymond and Brenda, have become a solid emotional pillar for both of us. They often visit my house every weekend, cook dinner for the family, take Amelia to the park, or sometimes take short trips to Santa Cruz Beach. However, not everything in the family goes smoothly. My sister Laura also has a daughter named Mila, the same age as Amelia. At first, I hoped the 2 children would become close friends, growing up together in the family's love. But reality was completely different. Mila inherited her mother's jealous nature. And it was that jealous nature of Laura and her daughter that led to a painful event 3 years ago, causing my daughter deep hurt. From that day until now, even though Laura has tried every way to reconcile, like writing letters, calling, and even asking our parents to intervene, I still can't forgive her. The pain that Amelia went through is still there in my heart, like a wound that never healed. The story I'm sharing today occurred 3 years ago, on a Sunday in September 2022. Amelia was only 8 years old then, and I was still trying to figure out how to be the best single father possible after life's upheavals. That day, around 1 in the morning, while I was deep asleep in the main bedroom, a terrible scream suddenly tore through the silence of the late night. The scream came from Amelia's room, just 1 wall away from mine. I don't remember exactly how my daughter screamed, but I know that sound was enough to make my heart stop beating for a moment. Right after my daughter's scream, I jumped out of bed. A father's instinct drove me to rush quickly to Amelia's room. In my drowsy mind, I only thought Amelia might be having a nightmare or something was wrong. As soon as I turned on the light switch, I saw Amelia sitting straight up on her little bed. My daughter was breathing heavily like she'd just run a long distance, her hair matted with sweat, and sweat drops were streaming down her chin. Her eyes were full of panic, as if still haunted by something terrible. Without hesitating another second, I rushed to her side. The moment I reached out to hug Amelia, she suddenly burst into tears. Not the gentle crying of a child who just woke up, but the painful, desperate crying of someone who had just gone through something horrible. That crying cut through my heart like a knife. Between her sobs, my daughter trembled and whispered, "Dad, I'm so scared. Please, Dad, don't send me to the orphanage." A feeling of shock and confusion overwhelmed me when I heard what my daughter had said. I quickly asked her with a worried voice, "Why would you say that? Why do you think I'd send you to an orphanage?" But Amelia didn't answer my question. She kept crying. Faced with this unexpected situation, I could only hold my daughter tight. My heart felt like it was breaking into pieces, witnessing my daughter endure such fear. It took me almost 20 minutes to completely calm her down. During that entire time, I kept stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort, promising that I'd always be by her side and protect her. I felt helpless, not understanding what had happened, but having to witness my daughter go through such pain. After Amelia had calmed down more, I gently said to her, "Sweetheart, I promise I'll always protect you. Nothing can hurt you. I'll never let that happen. Tell me what happened. I'll help you." Immediately, Amelia looked up at me. A few seconds later, she suddenly whispered with a trembling voice, "You have to promise not to tell Aunt Laura, then I'll dare to tell you." The moment Laura's name was mentioned, I knew for sure something had happened between my sister and my daughter. After a few seconds of hesitation, I nodded. "I promised Amelia. I promise I won't say anything to Aunt Laura. Just tell me what happened." Only after getting my promise did my daughter start telling the whole story, and what she told me left me both shocked and furious. I couldn't believe that the morning before, when I left Amelia at my parents' house to meet an important client, my sister could do things that I considered unacceptable to an 8-year-old child. After hearing the entire story, I tried to control my anger. I hugged Amelia tight and gently patted her back, trying to convey the love and safety she needed. In my heart at that moment, I had only one thought. I had to protect my daughter. Around 2 in the morning, Amelia finally fell asleep in my arms. As for me, I stayed awake that entire long night, my mind spinning with what I just heard. Every time I looked down at my daughter's sleeping face, I felt anger rising. In my heart, I just hoped morning would come quickly so I could seek justice for my little daughter. I stayed awake like that until 7 in the morning. Thoughts about the story Amelia had told kept spinning in my head. The anger in my heart was like a smoldering fire, waiting for the moment to burst into flames. When Amelia woke up, I prepared a simple breakfast with toast and a glass of milk, sitting next to her while she ate. She seemed calmer than last night, but I could still see some confusion in her eyes. At 8 in the morning, after dropping Amelia off at school, I immediately called my company to take the day off. Right after that, I drove straight to my parents' house. My parents' house is about 10 miles from mine. As soon as my car stopped in front of their gate, I saw Laura's familiar blue Honda Civic still parked in the yard. This confirmed that she had stayed overnight at our parents' house. After a few rings of the doorbell, my parents came to open the door. Their faces showed surprise when they saw me appear. My father frowned and asked with a surprised voice, "Owen, why are you here? I thought you'd be at work?" Instead of answering Dad's question, I asked directly with a stern voice, "Dad, is Laura here?" After my question, Mom glanced at Dad, then replied, "Yes, she's still sleeping upstairs. And Eric already picked up Mila early this morning to take her to school." Hearing Mom's answer, I didn't hesitate another second. I stepped past my parents and rushed straight up the stairs to the second floor. Standing in front of Laura's room door, I knocked with hard, firm knocks. After a while, the door opened and Laura appeared with the annoyed look of someone who'd just been woken up. Seeing me, Laura tried to act normal and asked with fake surprise, "Owen, what's wrong? Why are you here so early?" I didn't say a word. Instead, I grabbed Laura's wrist tightly and pulled her out of the room. She started screaming and resisting, but I was determined to drag her down to the living room where my parents were standing. Laura struggled and screamed with a panicked voice, "Owen, what are you doing? Let go of me." Laura's screaming scared my parents. They rushed toward me. Right after that, Dad ordered with a stern voice, "Owen, let Laura go right now." Mom also shouted with a worried voice, "What are you doing, Owen? Why are you acting like this?" But I still hadn't let go of Laura. I dragged her down to the living room and only then let go. At this point, my parents still had no idea what my sister had done to my daughter, and what I was about to tell them would shock them just as much as it had shocked me last night. Standing in the living room, my father started talking to me. "Enough. Owen, what's going on? Speak up." After Dad's question, I looked at Laura and replied with an angry voice, "Yesterday, Laura made my daughter kneel for almost an hour. Besides that, she also threatened to send Amelia to an orphanage." My words were like a bomb exploding in the quiet living room. My mother was shocked, her eyes wide open, unable to believe what she'd just heard. She shook her head and asked with a trembling voice, What? Owen, you're not joking. Laura couldn't do this. She loves Amelia. Right after that, Dad also supported Mom. He frowned and said with a doubtful voice, "That's right. I don't believe this. Who told you this? Who could make up a story like that?" Hearing Dad's question, I recounted the entire incident that happened at 1 in the morning. I described how Amelia startled awake, crying, with her terrible screams and what she had told me. When I got to the part where my daughter begged me not to send her to an orphanage, my voice choked up. After hearing the story, Mom whispered with a pained voice, "Oh my God, how could this happen?" Right then, Laura suddenly spoke up with a sharp, defensive voice. "Amelia is lying about me. I didn't do that." Hearing my sister deny it so blatantly, I turned to look at her and shouted, "You're still denying it?" Laura wouldn't back down. She shouted with an angry and bitter voice, "Amelia lied. She has mental health problems. There's something wrong with her head. You should take her to see a doctor." Hearing Laura talk about my daughter like that, Dad lost his patience. He shouted with a steely voice, "Laura, tell the truth. Did you make Amelia kneel and threaten to send her to an orphanage?" Laura continued to deny it at this point. She cried and screamed with a pitiful face, trying to make herself the victim. "I didn't do that. Amelia lied. She's lying to divide the family." Hearing Laura badmouth my daughter, I felt incredibly heartbroken. My sister dared to accuse an 8-year-old of plotting to harm the whole family. The thought that Laura could say such vicious things about my daughter felt like my heart was being torn apart. I could no longer control my anger. I stepped quickly toward Laura. I shouted in my sister's face with a voice full of rage, "You dare say my kid is trying to harm the family? She's just an 8-year-old." Anger had overcome reason. I raised my hand high, ready to slap Laura to get revenge for my daughter. But right then, Mom's shout rang out, "Enough, Owen." Mom's shout made me freeze, my hand still raised high. In that moment, I thought Mom was defending Laura, and this broke my heart. But that wasn't it. After seeing I had stopped, Mom turned to face Dad and said with a determined voice, "Raymond, we have cameras in the living room and a few other cameras around the house. Check them right now." Hearing Mom mention cameras, Dad nodded in understanding and quickly took out his phone to check the surveillance system. Meanwhile, Laura started turning pale. Laura stammered and asked my mother with a trembling voice, "Cameras? Mom, didn't you say they were broken?" Hearing that question, Mom realized the abnormality in Laura's reaction. She turned to look at Laura and said with a stern voice, but still with some hope, "If you tell the truth now, your father and I will be ready to forgive you. Don't make Dad check the cameras." Laura stood silent, looking at my parents with calculating eyes. The air in the room was so tense you could cut it with a knife. After almost 30 seconds of thinking, she suddenly roared with a fake confident voice, "I didn't do anything wrong. Mom and Dad can go ahead and check the cameras." I suppose that when Laura decided to continue hiding everything, she thought my parents were bluffing to make her confess. The cameras were actually broken, and no evidence was recorded. I guess that's what she thought, and that was the biggest mistake of her life. Hearing Laura still deny it, Mom nodded with a disappointed look and replied, "Excellent, Laura. Of course we'll check the cameras. Dad just called the service company to fix the cameras 3 days ago." The moment she heard that, Laura's face went ashen. Sweat started appearing on her forehead. In that moment, I knew everything was about to change forever in our family. It took Dad about 5 minutes to access the camera system through the app on his phone. During that entire time, the room was filled with terrifying silence. Laura stood motionless like a statue, her face pale and her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Mom sat down on the sofa, her hands trembling with worry. As for me, I stood waiting with my heart pounding, knowing that the truth was about to be exposed. After 5 minutes, Dad found the video recording of the incident that had occurred around 10 in the morning the previous day. He placed the phone on the table, and the whole family gathered around to look at the small screen. What we witnessed made me both angry and heartbroken. On the screen, the footage showed only 3 people in the living room at that time: Laura, Mila, and Amelia. First, the 2 children were sitting on the carpet playing, but then Mila started grabbing the stuffed animal that Amelia was holding. Mila's voice came through the phone speaker, "Amelia, give me this bear." I really like it. My daughter shook her head and hugged the bear tightly to her chest. Her voice small but firm. No, this is mine. My mom gave it to me. After Amelia refused, Mila started crying louder. Then Mila approached Laura and said, Mom, Amelia won't let me borrow the teddy bear. Right then, Laura intervened in the two children's argument with an annoyed voice. Amelia, give the bear to Mila. It's just a toy. After Laura's command-like statement, Amelia shook her head firmly, hugging the teddy bear tighter. Amelia politely replied, No, Aunt Laura, this is the last memory my mom left me. I can't give it to anyone. At this point, Laura had lost her patience. She said with an irritated and cold voice, Don't be selfish. Family has to know how to share. Give the bear to Mila right now. Faced with Laura's aggressive attitude, my daughter still firmly refused. She said to Laura, I'm sorry, but I can't give it away. My dad said this is the only thing I have left to remember my mom. Hearing this part, Dad had to pause the video. He looked at Laura with eyes full of disappointment and pain. Mom sat beside him with red eyes. She looked like she was about to cry, hearing her granddaughter's determined but hurt voice. As for me, I was both amazed and proud witnessing my daughter's strength. Even though she was just an 8-year-old child facing an aggressive adult, Amelia still firmly protected her mother's last memento. My heart ached thinking about how she had to face that threat alone. After calming down more, Dad resumed the video. What happened next made me clench my fists to hold back my anger. Laura suddenly snatched the stuffed animal from Amelia's hands and shouted, Then you don't need this bear anymore. After saying that, she threw the bear out of the living room window. Amelia started crying immediately. She screamed desperately, No, my bear. Amelia rushed toward the window, but Laura blocked her. Laura said with a threatening and cold voice, Be quiet right now. If you continue to cry, no one will love you anymore. From your grandparents to your dad, everyone will hate you and send you to an orphanage. Hearing this, Mom couldn't control herself anymore. She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands as if she couldn't bear hearing her daughter say such cruel things to her innocent granddaughter. As for me, my hands had clenched into fists. The anger in my heart erupted like a volcano, and the blood in my body felt like it was boiling. If Laura were a man, I probably couldn't have controlled myself and would have beaten her up to get revenge for my daughter. But no matter what, I still couldn't accept hitting a woman, no matter how cruel she was. Continuing to look at Dad's phone, after Laura's threat, Amelia whispered fearfully, Aunt Laura, don't say that. I'll be good. After saying that, Amelia tried not to cry anymore. But Laura still didn't stop. She continued with a vicious voice, Do you want to stay here? Then you have to be punished by kneeling for an hour and give the bear to Mila. That's the only condition. Amelia started panicking at this point. In the video, I could see my daughter's confusion. She shook her head and said with a trembling voice, I can't give the bear away. Please, Aunt Laura, don't make me do that. At this point, Laura took out her phone and pretended to dial a number. She said with a fake voice, Hello, I have a child who needs to be sent to an orphanage. Can you pick her up today? Immediately, Amelia panicked, cried, and begged. My daughter sobbed and said, No, Aunt Laura, don't. I'm begging you. A few seconds later, being too scared of being taken away, she trembled and said, I agree. I agree to give the teddy bear to Mila. I agree to be punished by kneeling. As soon as Amelia accepted the conditions, Laura hung up and said coldly, Good. Now go outside, pick up the bear, and bring it in to give to Mila. Then kneel here for an hour. After saying that, my daughter quickly ran outside to pick up the teddy bear. The scene of my daughter having to give up her mother's memento and go outside to pick up the bear broke my heart into pieces. After that, Amelia had to kneel in the middle of the living room while Mila happily played with the teddy bear she had just stolen. When the video ended, the entire room fell into absolute silence. The cruel threats and psychological abuse we had just witnessed shocked everyone. I realized that what Laura had done was worse than I had imagined. I looked at Laura with eyes full of hatred and disappointment. My sister had not only hurt my daughter physically and mentally, but also forced her to give up her mother's last gift. That action was unforgivable. In that moment, I realized that the sister I once loved no longer existed. After watching the entire cruel video, Dad couldn't control his anger anymore. He turned to Laura, his face red with rage, and shouted, "You dared to punish Amelia while we went to the grocery store yesterday morning?" Laura stood there like a stone statue, completely silent. She had no words left to defend her terrible behavior. All her previous denials had become meaningless in the face of clear evidence. Right after that, Mom stood up from the sofa with eyes red from tears. She turned to Laura and roared, her voice full of disappointment and pain. "I'm really disappointed in you." I couldn't hold it in anymore either. The anger that had been building up since 1 a.m. exploded, and I shouted in Laura's face, "Why did you do that to my daughter? She's just an 8-year-old who lost her mother." Dad's face was now red as a rooster, veins clearly visible on his forehead. He stepped toward Laura threateningly. Seeing Dad approaching, Laura became scared and quickly ran to hide behind Mom, seeking protection. Mom noticed the situation was getting tense. She put her hand on Dad's shoulder and said with a determined voice, "Stop it. Call 911. Hearing Mom mention calling the police, Laura suddenly fell to her knees and started crying. She begged with a trembling voice, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Don't call the police. I promise I'll never do it again." But my parents were too angry and disappointed. They no longer trusted Laura's promises. Dad shook his head firmly and said, "No, you've gone too far. This can't be overlooked." Mom also agreed with Dad. She said with a cold voice, "You heard Amelia. This is unforgivable behavior." Laura continued to cry and beg, but no one in the family was moved anymore. She had crossed the acceptable line by hurting an innocent child. Finally, Dad took out his phone and dialed 911. He said to the operator, "I need to report a case of child abuse. Can you send the police over?" When she heard Dad actually calling the police, Laura completely broke down and cried louder. But it was too late now. What she had done to Amelia couldn't be erased with tears. In my heart, although it hurt to witness my parents calling the police on my sister, I knew this was the right thing to do to protect my daughter. While waiting for the police to arrive, Laura exploded with one last burst of anger. She stood up and shouted at my parents with a bitter voice, "It's all your fault. You always favor Owen. Since we were little, you've never been fair to me." Hearing my sister's words, I looked at her with amazement. Even at this moment, when her cruel behavior toward my daughter had been exposed, Laura was still trying to blame others instead of taking responsibility for her actions. Laura continued shouting with a voice full of resentment. "When we were young, you always praised Owen for being smart, but I never got any recognition. When Owen got divorced, you comforted and supported him. But when I had problems in my marriage, you told me to be patient. Now Owen has a daughter, and you love and spoil Amelia more than Mila." Hearing Laura list the injustices she thought she had endured, Mom shook her head with a pained expression. She stood up and said with a trembling voice, "Amelia doesn't have a mother anymore. Don't you think she's pitiful? You can be jealous of your brother, but how could you hurt an innocent child?" But Laura still wouldn't listen. She shouted with an increasingly harsh voice, "That's just an excuse. You've always loved Owen more than me. Even now, you're still taking his side instead of protecting me." Dad couldn't stand it anymore at this point. He stood up and shouted at Laura, "You're not a queen. We've always been fair to both of you, even favored you more." After making that statement, Dad began listing specific events to refute Laura's accusations. Looking straight into Laura's eyes, he almost shouted, "You should remember, when you were in college, I paid the expensive tuition for you to attend a private school, while Owen had to borrow money to study. When you wanted to open a hair salon, I gave you $20,000. Owen had to handle everything himself." After saying this, Dad paused for a few seconds to catch his breath. A few seconds later, he continued with a voice full of rage. "When you gave birth to Mila, your mother took 3 months off work to take care of you and your child. When Owen got divorced, we could only comfort him with words. How else do you want us to favor you?" Hearing what Dad said, Mom also nodded in agreement and added with a painful voice, "We've loved both children and both grandchildren equally. If we treat Amelia well, it's because she lost her mother and needs more love. That's compassion, not favoritism." But Laura remained stubborn. She shook her head firmly and shouted, "No, you've always loved Owen more. I've had to live in his shadow my whole life. You never see my efforts." Hearing those words, I looked at my sister with profound disappointment. Even after being caught hurting my daughter, Laura was still trying to make herself the victim. She showed no remorse for her actions, instead focusing on blaming everyone else. Dad was too exhausted at this point. He finally said with a cold and determined voice, "Enough, Laura. You're over 30 but still acting like a child. You can't justify abusing a child by blaming your parents." As soon as Dad finished speaking, there was a knock at the door announcing that the police had arrived. In that moment, I knew things would never be the same in our family again. After my father opened the door, 2 police officers entered the house with serious expressions. Dad immediately showed them his phone so they could watch the video recording of the entire incident. While the police watched the video, Laura sat hunched on the sofa with a pale face. She knew there was no way to deny it anymore, given the overwhelming evidence. After watching the video, one of the 2 officers turned to Laura and said earnestly, "You need to come with us to the station for questioning." Hearing that, Laura burst into tears and pleaded, "Please, officers, this is just a family misunderstanding." But the officer shook his head and replied, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used as evidence. Please come to the car voluntarily, don't make us use force." Seeing the officer's firmness, Laura had nothing more to say and nodded in quiet agreement. Before being led to the police car, Laura turned back and shouted at my parents with a voice full of resentment, "It's all your fault. You've favored Owen your whole life." She continued screaming while being led away, "Owen, you've ruined my life. Remember what you did today." Hearing my sister's words, my parents and I all shook our heads in unison. After the police took Laura away, the room fell into heavy silence. My parents stood there looking exhausted and heartbroken. They had just witnessed their daughter being taken away for child abuse. About a minute later, Mom came close to me and said with a self-blaming voice, "Owen, I'm sorry. Yesterday, I shouldn't have left Amelia alone at home with Laura. I failed to protect Amelia." Dad also nodded in agreement and said with a voice full of regret, "I'm sorry too, son. If I hadn't asked Mom to go to the grocery store, leaving Amelia with Laura, this wouldn't have happened." Hearing what they said, I suddenly felt an unusual warmth. I shook my head and replied sincerely, "It's not your fault. Laura has harbored a long-standing dislike for Amelia. If not this time, there would have been another time. She would have hurt her anyway." Hearing me say that, Dad put his hand on my shoulder as a gesture of apology and sharing. He said nothing more, just stood there silently with eyes full of pain. After that, he slowly turned and walked to the bedroom, his appearance that of an older man who was exhausted. As for me, I hugged my mom goodbye and returned home. On the way home, my mind was spinning with thoughts about how to explain to Amelia what had happened. That evening, around 6 o'clock, the doorbell at my house rang. When I opened the door, I saw Eric, Laura's husband, standing with my parents and Mila. Eric's face looked tired and tense. He probably knew about what his wife had done. As soon as she saw her grandparents, Amelia quickly rushed from the living room and hugged my parents tightly. She still seemed a bit scared after what she'd been through, but it seemed like being with people who loved her made her feel safer. My parents knelt to Amelia's eye level and hugged her tight. They apologized to their granddaughter with gentle words full of regret. Eric also approached and bent down to apologize to Amelia. Mila stood next to her father, her expression one of embarrassment and fear. After hesitating for a while, Mila approached Amelia and returned the teddy bear. Mila apologized. Amelia took back the bear and hugged it tightly to her chest, as if she was hugging back a part of her mother's memory. The group stayed at my house for about 2 hours to talk and comfort Amelia. The atmosphere was sad but much warmer than the tense morning. My parents tried to make Amelia happy again, telling stories and playing with her. Around 8 in the evening, Eric and my parents prepared to leave. They needed to go to the police station to bail Laura out and review the necessary legal procedures. Before leaving, they assured me once again that they would do everything possible to ensure Amelia's safety in the future. 3 days after the incident, around 6 p.m., the doorbell suddenly rang. When I opened the door, 2 workers from Child Protective Services were standing outside, their badges visible on their suit jackets. For an entire hour, they spoke privately with Amelia, asking about what had happened and observing her reactions. Although Amelia seemed back to normal, I was still worried about the hidden trauma she might be keeping secret. Fortunately, after their assessment, the CPS workers stated that the incident didn't leave Amelia with overly serious psychological wounds. However, they recommended I take her to see a psychologist to ensure she got full support in overcoming what she'd been through. Regarding Laura, the CPS worker informed me that she wouldn't face jail time since this was her first offense and there were no serious physical injuries. However, the court would issue a restraining order between Laura and Amelia. Additionally, Laura might lose custody rights for 6 months and would have to attend anger management classes. I nodded and thanked the CPS workers for their support and saw them out. The next morning, I took my daughter to the psychology clinic following the CPS workers' advice. The doctor spoke privately with Amelia for about an hour. Fortunately, after the evaluation, the doctor said the incident didn't affect my daughter's psychology too seriously. Amelia could still overcome what she'd been through with family support. After everything that happened, I still felt lucky that at least my parents stood on the side of what's right and protected their granddaughter. Not all families can get through a test like this with their love still intact. A week later, the CPS worker called to inform me about the court hearing results. As expected, Laura wasn't sentenced to prison, since this was her first offense and no serious injury was caused. However, the court issued a strict restraining order between Laura and Amelia until my daughter turned 18. Additionally, Laura was stripped of custody of Amelia for 6 months and required to attend court-mandated anger management classes. Hearing this news, I felt relieved knowing my daughter was protected by law. 6 months after the incident, on a quiet weekend afternoon, the doorbell suddenly rang. When I opened the door, Laura was standing there with a gaunt face and eyes full of regret. She was carrying flowers and trying to apologize, but I cut her off and demanded she leave immediately. Even though she'd gone through 6 months of anger management classes, I still couldn't forgive what she'd done to my daughter. I slammed the door shut and turned away, not wanting to hear another word from my sister. 3 years have passed since that day's incident. Amelia is now 11 years old, much more mature than she was at 8. Our lives have stabilized again. My parents still visit regularly, and they always show special love for Amelia. Our relationship has grown closer after what we've been through. Over the past 3 years, Laura has consistently attempted to contact me. She's sent messages, called, even written long emails to apologize and hope for forgiveness. But it's all been useless. Every time I see her name appear on my phone, I remember the scene of Amelia having to kneel and cry, begging. But 3 days ago, Mom said something that made me think again. That day, she put her hand on my shoulder and said gently, "Laura has changed a lot. If possible, please forgive her." Hearing Mom say that, I was surprised and immediately asked, "What do you mean?" After my question, Mom looked at me, smiled slightly, and replied, "I won't interfere in your and Laura's business. Whatever you decide, I'll respect." After saying that, Mom and Dad left, leaving me with unanswered thoughts. That's just my mother's personality. She's always like that, never repeating herself twice or explaining further once she's given advice. She lets me think and decide for myself. The restraining order against Laura is still in effect. According to the court's decision, she's banned from contacting Amelia until my daughter turns 18. This means Laura won't be able to see Amelia for the next 7 years. But as for me, sometimes I think about forgiving her. Maybe 3 years is long enough for my anger to fade. Maybe Laura has really changed, like Mom said. But then I remember Amelia's tears that night, and the anger rises again. I really don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe that everyone can change and deserves a second chance. But the other part reminds me that my daughter had to endure trauma that could affect her for life. What do you think? Should I forgive Laura? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other real-life stories. My story ends here. Thank you for following this long story. See you in the following stories. I never thought a stain on a couch would expose everything my family had been hiding for 15 years. That $8,500 couch is somewhere in the city dump now, but the emotional wounds are still here with us. When Mia, my 11-year-old daughter, reached a significant milestone at my sister's housewarming party. None of us knew it would set off a chain of events that would change our family relationships forever. This is the story of how a family navigated the boundaries between material things and emotions, and how we found our way back to each other. Before I delve into the details of the story, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for taking the time to listen to my story today. Hello everyone, I'm Mason Reed, 38 years old. The story I'm sharing today occurred in early May this year, a fateful day that altered the relationships within my family in ways nobody could have predicted. That Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the window curtains of our small apartment in Oak Ridge while I was making pancakes for Mia. Ever since Jessica, my wife, passed away from cancer 2 years ago, life for the two of us in this 2-bedroom apartment has become simpler, but also full of unexpected challenges. Mia has mild autism, and her world is usually wrapped in familiarity and stable routines. As I set the plate in front of her, I tried to say in my most cheerful voice, "Eat up quick, we're gonna get to Aunt Brenda's housewarming party right on time." Mia nodded, her eyes still looking down at her plate. She carefully cut each small piece, evenly, an orderly world she created in the middle of life's chaos. The relationship between my sister, Brenda, and me always had an underlying tension. She's a middle manager at an insurance company, with a lovely new house and fancy furniture. And me, I'm an HVAC repair technician, still struggling to pay off the remaining medical bills from when Jessica was getting treatment. While we were getting ready to leave, I received an emergency call from a family I knew in the old neighborhood. Their heating system had stopped working entirely during this unusual cold snap, which was especially serious since they had a 3-month-old baby. I had to change our original plan, even though I knew this would only make things more tense with Brenda. Luckily, I could fix it fast. Just a broken relay, something I always keep in my truck. After quickly weighing my options, I knelt to Mia's eye level, gently took her small hand, and explained in a reassuring voice, "I need to go fix an emergency heating system. Grandma and Grandpa will take you to the party first, and I'll get there as soon as I can. Okay?" Mia's eyes widened, then looked down at the floor, her familiar response when she had to deal with sudden changes. Her small body gradually curled up, as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. With obvious worry in my voice, I called Mom and asked, "Can you pick up Mia and take her to Brenda's party first? I've got an emergency I need to handle." After giving detailed instructions about Mia's condition, that she needed quiet space and might sit alone with a book if she felt overwhelmed, I gave her her spring jacket and her Harry Potter book. Trying to reassure her, I said in a gentle voice, "I'll get there as fast as I can, all right?" When my parents' old Chevrolet picked up Mia at our apartment entrance, I quickly drove my old Ford pickup to the customer's house. I wasn't too worried, because if Mia were with Grandma, she'd be well taken care of. That gave me some peace of mind, though perhaps I should have listened to my instinct, which told me something wasn't right about this plan. It was only later, when I was sipping hot tea with Mom in my small kitchen, that I learned what happened before I got to the party, the warning signs we probably should have paid attention to. According to my mom, as soon as they arrived at Brenda's 2-story brickfront house in the new neighborhood, my sister spent over 20 minutes giving guests a tour, constantly mentioning the price of every single item. The house wasn't a luxury mansion, but for a middle-class family in Oak Ridge, it was a symbol of success. 4 bedrooms with a master ensuite, a spacious family room, and a modern open kitchen that Brenda had always dreamed of. When recalling every detail, my mom mimicked Brenda's excited tone and said, "This lighting system was custom ordered from a designer in Philadelphia. Only costs $3,200, but it's worth every penny." With a sad expression, Mom continued describing how Greg, Brenda's husband, quietly followed behind, almost invisible in his wife's shadow. He'd occasionally glance at his wife with worry whenever she got too excited about material value. While stirring her tea, my mom sighed and shared, "I could see Greg wanted to pull Brenda back, but Greg never does that. I don't know if it's because he's tired of arguments, or because he's given up on trying to change Brenda." Meanwhile, Cassidy, Brenda and Greg's 14-year-old daughter, followed behind with obvious annoyance. While other guests seemed impressed, she kept rolling her eyes every time her mom mentioned another expensive item. With Mom's vivid description, I could picture that tour scene. Brenda stopped in the living room, where the cream-colored Natuzzi leather couch was positioned center stage, her pride and joy, stroking the soft leather surface. Brenda announced to the whole group, "This is the room's focal point. Premium Italian leather, imported directly." Greg wanted to buy faux leather, but I said no. We deserve the best. But Greg just smiled awkwardly, saying nothing. During all this, Mia sat quietly in the corner of the couch, away from the crowd, completely absorbed in her book to avoid sensory overload. After the tour group moved to the dining room, my mom noticed that Brenda kept looking back at Mia with worry, as if she were scared my daughter would damage her precious furniture. With obvious concern, my mom approached Brenda and whispered gently, "Maybe Mia should sit somewhere else? She seems more comfortable in a quiet corner somewhere." Brenda smiled, but her eyes weren't friendly at all when she replied, "Everything's been arranged perfectly for the party. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on things." Right then, Cassidy showed special concern for Mia. She left the tour group and sat down next to Mia, gently asking with a warm voice, "What book is that? Is it good? If it gets too loud, you can come up to my room." When my mom told me that detail, Dad took a sip of tea and commented thoughtfully, "Cassidy seems very different from her mother. She invited Mia upstairs if the party got too noisy." But Brenda quickly cut in, saying Cassidy had to stay downstairs to greet guests. My mom also shared about the long-standing tension between Brenda and my dad, who always disagreed with his daughter's materialistic lifestyle. During the party, they avoided talking directly, only exchanging necessary pleasantries. That's when I really realized, while I was still struggling with the broken heating system at the customer's house, trying to finish the job as fast as possible, I had no idea that at Brenda's house, a completely different situation was forming, one that none of us could have prepared for. Just over 20 minutes after the emergency call, the heating system was fixed quickly. Luckily, I still made it to the party when it was at its most lively stage. When I got there, I went straight to the living room to find Mia. My daughter was still sitting in the corner of the pristine white couch, her eyes glued to her book, but her body more tense than usual. I quickly walked over and asked quietly, "You doing okay?" Mia just nodded slightly and kept focusing on her page, not looking up. I was about to sit down next to her when Brenda appeared, looking stressed but trying to maintain a social smile with the guests. With eyes hiding something uncomfortable, my sister pointed toward the backyard and said quietly, "Mason, Greg's having trouble with the grill. Can you go help him out?" I got the message right away. She didn't want to introduce me to her friends, and honestly, I didn't like socializing with those strangers anyway. I nodded, told my daughter to stay put, and headed to the backyard to help Greg with the grilling. I'd been out there about 15 minutes, just enough time to say hello to a few people and focus on grilling, when a scream tore through the party's cheerful atmosphere. It was Brenda's voice, but with a tone I'd never heard before: raw, uncontrolled anger. Without hesitation, I dropped the tongs and ran into the house, my heart pounding as I heard Mia's crying mixed with Brenda's shouting. When I stepped through the glass door into the living room, the scene before me froze me. Brenda was gripping Mia's wrist, pulling her up from the couch, her face red with rage. Right then, every other sound seemed to disappear, leaving only my heart hammering in my chest. I quickly scanned the room. Greg stood nearby, looking helpless and panicked. His shoulders slumped like he'd already surrendered. With a voice trembling and so quiet it was barely audible, Greg tried to tell his wife, "Brenda, calm down." But Brenda's fury completely drowned out his words, and Mia was sobbing, trying to pull her hand free, her eyes wide with fear, confusion, not understanding what was happening. When I got closer, I realized the problem: a bright red stain clearly visible on the cream leather couch, and a similar stain on Mia's pants. In one painful moment of clarity, I understood immediately. Mia was having her first period. With angry eyes and arms gesturing toward the chair, Brenda snarled at Mia, "Do you see what you did? This couch is worth $8,500. How could you be so careless?" Greg, gathering all his courage, tried to approach his wife. With a gentle but more determined voice than before, he told Brenda, "Honey, it's just a couch." But Brenda immediately turned around, her eyes shooting angry rays that made Greg back away instantly. All his courage vanished in 1 second. Without thinking, I rushed over like an arrow, every protective instinct rising powerfully. I grabbed Brenda's arm and yanked hard, pulling her hand away from my daughter's wrist. With a voice I'd never used before, I told my sister, "Let her go right now." My voice rang out in the suddenly silent room. Guests stood frozen, everyone turning toward us as we stared at the unfolding family conflict, an uninvited drama unfolding before us. When my sister panicked and let go of Mia, I pulled my daughter toward me, then knelt beside her, quickly taking off my shirt and wrapping it around her waist, covering the stain on her pants. Holding Mia close, I whispered in her ear with a gentle voice, "It's okay, honey. I'm here. Everything's gonna be fine." Mia buried her face in my shoulder, her whole body shaking. I could feel her panic, both physical and emotional. Meanwhile, Brenda wasn't cooling down at all. With her face still flushed red, she pointed straight at me and said sarcastically, "Do you have money to buy an expensive couch like mine that you dare stop me? Why don't you teach your daughter to be more careful?" Greg, in one last effort, put his hand on his wife's shoulder. With a quiet but firm voice, he asked Brenda, "Don't you see the kid scared?" Without bothering to respond, Brenda roughly shoved her husband's hand away and kept staring at me with angry eyes. Anger rose in me like a blazing fire. I stood up straight, still keeping Mia close to me, and told Brenda in a cold voice, "What the hell are you talking about? She just had her first period. She doesn't understand what's happening. And you grabbed her like that?" My mom quickly came over to us, gently taking Mia from my arms. With the tenderness only a grandmother could have, she led her granddaughter away from the eye of the storm. My dad, meanwhile, had positioned himself between me and Brenda, a familiar position he'd held many times throughout our lives. But this time, there was something different about his stance, a determination I rarely saw. 15 years of tension between Brenda and me, about money, lifestyle, and values were all converging in this moment. And when I saw Brenda continue criticizing not just me but also our parents, I wasn't prepared for the reaction from the person I thought was the calmest in our family. When my mom realized the situation was getting worse, she continued holding Mia tightly, shielding her granddaughter and saying with a firm voice, "Brenda, stop it. The kid's panicking, and this isn't the time to argue." Instead of listening, Brenda whipped around to face Mom, her eyes blazing with anger, pointing straight at Mia and asking harshly, "You're defending her? That kid just ruined my expensive couch, and you're taking her side? Do you know how much that couch is worth?" Mia trembled in Grandma's arms, her crying gradually fading to choked sobs. Not from pain but from shame and fear. I felt my blood boiling when I saw my daughter being treated like this. Taking my phone out of my pocket, I looked straight at Brenda's face and said coldly, "If you touch my daughter one more time, I'm calling the police. That's called assaulting a minor, you know that?" Brenda's eyes widened, like she couldn't believe her ears. "You're threatening to call the cops to my house? Over a couch? You've lost it, Mason." While we kept arguing, my dad had stepped forward, his face gradually turning red, his voice dropping with warning. "Brenda, stop it right now. It's just a couch. Just a couch? Dad doesn't understand its value. How long did I have to work to buy it? And your granddaughter needs one careless minute to ruin everything." Brenda turned to Dad, looking like she couldn't believe her ears. In that moment, I no longer recognized the sister who grew up with me through those sweet childhood years. There was a time we shared everything, from cotton candy to childhood dreams. But now, standing in front of me was a stranger, someone who valued a piece of furniture more than a child's feelings. Suddenly, with even angrier eyes, Brenda turned to our parents, pointing straight at them and saying bitterly, "You two as well, always depending on me. Who paid for your trip last year? Who fixed your air conditioner last month? And now you're both taking their side?" Her words were like knife cuts, exposing a complex relationship I only knew part of. Her accusations hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd never known she'd been supporting our parents financially. I looked at Mom and Dad, seeing them stiffen from these public accusations. Right then, Greg stood far from his wife, clearly embarrassed, but still not brave enough to stop her. He looked around, like he was searching for an escape from a situation he'd witnessed too many times before, when Brenda put material value above everything else. But what I'll never forget is my dad's face, gradually turning dark red. A sign I'd only seen a few times in my life, warning of his rare anger. And that's when the real line got crossed. The room fell silent as my dad slowly walked to the table, picking up the expensive bottle of Cabernet that Brenda had just bragged about from the famous Napa Valley vineyard. I saw Greg swallow hard, like he knew something was about to happen. With obvious worry, my mom quickly spoke up. "Harold, don't," but it was too late. With one decisive motion, my dad opened the wine bottle and poured the dark red liquid directly onto the middle of the couch, right over the stain, then threw the whole bottle down onto the chair. The sound of the bottle hitting the couch surface made everyone in the room jump. Brenda screamed, rushing toward the chair like it was a wounded creature. "Oh my God, are you insane?" With a deep but powerful voice, my dad looked straight into Brenda's eyes. "How much was that couch? $8,500? I'll pay for it. But you don't get to treat my granddaughter like that. Never." Brenda stood there, mouth agape, speechless. While everyone was still in shock, my dad took out his phone, opened his banking app, and made a transaction immediately. After a few seconds, he looked up at Brenda and quickly showed her the transfer screen. I only found out later that money was part of what my parents had saved for when they passed away, so Brenda and I wouldn't have to worry about funeral costs. That was money they'd saved for years, dollar by dollar, from side jobs and hard sacrifices. The moment I realized this, I felt my chest being crushed, my spine sagging like there was an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. "You can't do that," Brenda said, her voice having lost its anger, replaced by disbelief and a bit of panic. The simple stain on the chair had now become an irreparable dark red pool. With a voice that was calmer but still determined, my dad said, "It's transferred. Full amount. But money can't buy everything, Brenda. Can't buy love or respect." From the corner of the room, I saw Greg quietly nod in agreement, like this was something he'd always wanted to tell his wife but never dared to. There was a flash of gratitude when he looked toward my dad, a silent alliance between two men who'd been quiet too long. Brenda stood there, stunned by Dad's action, the man she'd always thought would side with her, and her husband's silent betrayal. For the first time since I'd walked into the room, I saw the anger on her face give way to confusion. Right then, another voice rang out from the staircase. "How could you do that, Mom?" We all turned around. Cassidy, Brenda's daughter, stood at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes red from tears. She'd witnessed the whole thing. In her eyes, I saw not just disappointment but deep pain. With a trembling but determined voice, Cassidy looked straight at her mother. "You went through this too. I'm ashamed of you." Then, before Brenda could react, Cassidy turned and ran upstairs, leaving deadly silence in the room. Cassidy's words were the final puzzle piece, a reminder that Brenda had once gone through a similar embarrassing moment, but now couldn't empathize. In that moment, I saw something break in Brenda's eyes. Not anger, but a painful realization, like she'd just seen herself in an undeniable mirror. Greg approached his wife, for the first time with a determined expression, saying in a gentle but meaningful voice, "You need to think about what's important, Brenda. We built a house, but not a home." When the sound of Cassidy's bedroom door slamming echoed from upstairs, the party dissolved in awkward silence. I held Mia close, feeling her warmth and trembling, and we left that house. I had no idea this was just the beginning of a long and challenging journey to piece together our broken family. The moment I put Mia in the passenger seat and let her sit next to me, looking at my daughter curled up with eyes red from crying, I realized I was the one most at fault. If only I hadn't let Mia go to the party. If only I'd been beside her when this happened. But maybe, somehow, the truth about Brenda had to be exposed. I didn't want my daughter to be the one paying the price. On the way home, I quickly stopped by the local pharmacy to buy what she needed. This was probably the first time in my life that I stood confused in the women's products section, unsure of which type to choose. But I wasn't scared anymore. I remembered Jessica's advice before she passed away, that our girl would go through critical stages in life, and I'd have to be the one guiding her. But maybe the tough life of a single father getting by after losing his wife made me forget something. My Mia was really vulnerable, and I hadn't prepared her emotionally enough. After that rushed pharmacy trip, we returned to the apartment in silence. Mia just occasionally sniffled, and I didn't know what to say to comfort her. Luckily, I didn't have to face this difficult situation alone for too long. I just brought Mia back to the apartment when there was a knock at the door. My parents stood there, still looking stunned after the incident, but with precise determination to help in their eyes. Without waiting for me to invite them in, my mom quickly took charge. With gentle but decisive hands, she led Mia into the bathroom and said warmly, "Let me help you, my sweet granddaughter. I know what to do." That was a moment when I felt both grateful and helpless, because my mom was there when I had no idea what to do, as I couldn't take care of my daughter myself at such a critical time. While waiting, Dad and I sat down at the kitchen table, 2 cups of bitter black coffee and heavy silence between 2 men who rarely shared emotions. I could see his hands shaking slightly as he held his cup. After a long silence, my dad finally looked straight into my eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let my emotions get the better of me like that." But when I saw how Brenda treated Mia, his voice trailed off, words seemingly not enough to express what he felt. I'd never seen my dad show this much emotion. He'd always been the model of restraint and stability in our family. Suddenly, like breaking a dam that had held too long, he began staring into space and confessing, "Our family was so lucky to have Brenda succeed like that. I was always proud of her, but I never expected she'd changed, valuing material things more than family." I noticed his shoulders slump, as if he were carrying an invisible burden. With a choked voice and red-rimmed eyes, my dad revealed, "I'm sorry for neglecting you and Mia after your wife passed away. I was too stunned, too heartbroken. And then Brenda stepped in, provided financial assistance, and I let her take control, let you two face everything alone." In that moment, I looked up at Dad, realizing this was the first time we'd really talked about the years after Jessica died. Our family had always avoided the pain by not mentioning it, as if silence could erase the wounds. Looking toward the bathroom with regretful eyes, my dad continued, "Lucky Mom was there for her all that time, while I let Brenda control everything, because I owed her too much, just when I was still confused." Light laughter came from the bathroom, a rare sound on a long day, as my mom taught her how to use the necessary products. I could picture the patience and love that only a grandmother could give her granddaughter in moments like these. Looking that way, I felt a mix of warmth and pain. Life shouldn't be like this. Mia deserved to have her mother beside her during such critical moments. Turning back to Dad, I said quietly with a lowered voice, "Maybe we all owe Mia an apology for putting her in today's situation." My dad nodded, looking distant. Then he added thoughtfully, "And maybe we owe Greg an apology too. He's a good man, but not strong enough to stand up to Brenda. He loves her, but let that love cloud his judgment." I realized that Greg, in some way, was like all of us, trapped in Brenda's circle of influence, not brave enough to break it, until an incident forced us to face the truth. That night, when Mia slept among the pillows my mom had arranged into a nest for her, I sat with my parents in my small living room, and we started a conversation that should have happened long ago, about loss, about money, about family values, and about how unhealed wounds can spread through generations. Around 11 p.m., when my parents left, I sat in my daughter's room watching Mia sleep peacefully among the pillows. In that moment, memories of Jessica came flooding back like scattered puzzle pieces. Her smile when we welcomed Mia into the world, her warm voice when she taught me how to care for our child, and those final words of advice before she left forever. I didn't know how my sister's family had handled everything after that incident. It was only later that I learned that the couch wasn't insured, even though Greg had reminded her many times. Brenda, despite working in insurance, refused to insure her own property because she wanted to save some money. She'd always been proud of her carefulness and perfection in everything. "Our house is always neat. No mischievous kids, no pets, no noisy parties. Why would we waste money on risks that don't exist?" she told her husband, a decision she was surely regretting now. The next morning was a tough day for me, waking up to find Mia had leaked onto the bed because she wasn't used to wearing pads at night. Her eyes were wide with panic, her body curling up like she wanted to disappear. Worse, she was holding her stomach, face scrunched up from the first cramps she'd ever experienced. Mia groaned with a pained expression, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, it hurts so bad. Why does my stomach hurt like this?" I quickly sat down beside her, gently placing my hand on her shoulder and saying in the calmest voice I could manage, "This is natural. Nobody's blaming you. I'll help you handle this. Luckily, I'd spent the entire night before reading advice from other single parents raising daughters. I quickly got the heating pad I'd prepared and a mild painkiller suitable for children that I'd researched thoroughly on parenting forums. With patience learned from years of caring for Mia, I carefully guided her through personal hygiene and proper pad changing. I gathered the bedsheets to wash and bought a special type of overnight pad that parenting forums recommended for girls who are just starting. When giving Mia the heating pad, I gently instructed, "Put this on your stomach, honey, it'll help with the pain. And take this pill too." As we sat eating breakfast, Mia still occasionally winced from the dull aches. She looked at me with teary eyes and asked shakily, "Dad, am I gonna hurt like this every month? And am I gonna mess everything up?" My heart broke when I realized her fear was still there after Brenda's reaction. I set down my coffee cup, looked straight into my daughter's eyes, and answered firmly, "It won't always hurt like this, sweetheart. And no, you won't mess everything up. This is a natural part of growing up. Every girl goes through this. We'll learn how to handle it together, I promise." For both of us, it was our first time experiencing this, but I knew everything would be okay. I spent a weekend with her, providing a safe space for her to adjust to the changes her body was undergoing. I understood that a girl with autism would need more time to adapt to changes and new routines, so I created a specific schedule with visual guides, allowing Mia to track when to change pads, take pain medication, and use the heating pad. I didn't stop there. I also drew a simple chart with color symbols that Mia could easily recognize, a red circle for pad changing time, a blue pill when stomach cramps appeared, and an orange heating pack when she needed rest. For Mia, having clear orders and procedures was the best way for her to overcome anxiety and uncertainty. I put this chart in her bathroom, and a smaller copy in her school backpack preparation I knew would help her feel more confident facing this situation at school. In the afternoon, when we were watching Mia's favorite movie together, she curled up on the couch with the heating pad on her stomach, and my phone rang. My mom called, her voice full of worry. "Have you handled everything okay? I'm here to help if you need it. Is Mia having stomach cramps? I can bring some herbal tea which used to be very effective for Brenda." After I told her what I'd done, my mom's voice softened and she said proudly, "You did great, Mason. I know this isn't easy for you too, but you're doing really well. Remember to watch if Mia's in a lot of pain. She might need to see a doctor." After learning I'd researched thoroughly and was handling the situation well, my mom sighed with relief, and I realized I actually had someone to lean on in the most challenging moments. When I told Mia about Grandma's call, she leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "I don't know what you'd do without her." I hugged my daughter close, feeling the fragility and strength simultaneously in her small body, and replied gently, "You're right. We're fortunate." After that day, the atmosphere in my family became even quieter. The family group chat where my sister bragged daily about new achievements suddenly went silent. That's when I realized, regret is the hardest thing for people who always think they're right. 3 days later, when she'd gotten through the first days of her menstrual cycle, when I saw her become skilled at personal hygiene and knew how to deal with stomach cramps, I could only thank the helpful online resources and my mom's remote support. On the 4th day, for the first time in many days, I got a call from my sister, but I didn't answer because to me, she'd left too deep a wound in my daughter's heart and our families. I didn't know what Brenda wanted to say then, but I knew that much later. When I got a call from Cassidy, my niece, I'd understand that night. My sister had started facing the dark side of the perfect exterior she'd worked so hard to build. After my flat refusal, the next day, Brenda and Cassidy came to the apartment. When I saw my niece with swollen eyes from crying, I knew that for them, the days after that incident really weren't easy at all. When I was about to refuse to let them in, Cassidy looked at me with pleading eyes and said in a trembling voice, "I just want to see Mia. Uncle Mason, please let me see Mia for just a bit." I only allowed Cassidy to come in and see Mia. No matter how angry I was at Brenda, I knew Cassidy didn't deserve to bear the consequences of her mother's actions. During the brief meeting between the two cousins, standing outside the room door, I saw Cassidy give Mia a hand-drawn picture with detailed instructions on handling menstrual cycles, along with a bag of supplies that Mia called her protection kit. Maybe Cassidy had spent many days researching and preparing these things for her cousin. Before leaving, seeing my hard stance, My sister looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said quietly, "Give me a chance, okay, Mason? I'm really sorry about what happened." But when I saw Mia staying stubbornly in her room and refusing to come out to see Brenda, I knew the wound in her heart was still too deep. After that day, Cassidy asked to call Mia more often. Perhaps she wanted to make amends for the harm her mother had caused. Brenda and Greg also sent letters many times, but Mia refused to read them because she wasn't ready to face those painful memories. My parents also put a clear distance between themselves and Brenda. They still welcomed Cassidy every weekend, but how they treated their eldest daughter had changed. A week after the incident, Brenda sent back the $8,500 to Dad, along with an apology letter. My dad wouldn't accept it and just said the money wasn't the issue, but how she treated Mia. That's when I realized, sometimes love needs boundaries to teach us how to appreciate things. My sister also had to face the consequences of her actions. Many customers who learned about the story switched to other insurance agencies. Her colleagues and neighbors condemned how she treated a child with special needs. But I knew losing family bonds was Brenda's most significant pain. As for me, I could only try my best to fulfill my role as a father. What my sister did was something that could hardly be completely forgiven, and it left scars in Mia's heart. Even if time can fade the wounds, even if we can learn to talk again, the relationship between my sister and me will never be the same. If there's one thing I want to share with you through this story, it's this: don't let superficial material things overshadow the real value of love and family. Expensive things will eventually become outdated and break, but wounds in someone's heart may never fully heal. Thank you for listening to this story, a journey that wasn't easy to share. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with others. Maybe someone else needs to hear this too. See you again.